Philip Rivers is trading in the SoCal Sun for some Midwestern roots and a reunion with a familiar coaching staff, all in an effort to bring the Colts something they have not had since 2006, a Super Bowl. Can a change at quarterback, an improving defense, and a solid draft class lead the Hoosier State back to the promised lands? Jake Arthur is a contributor to Colts.com, and he was gracious enough with his time this week to join me on the program to tell me if the Colts can recapture the ultimate prize. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So when we look at the Colts, obviously one of the biggest offseason acquisitions they had this year was the addition of Philip Rivers. So I'm just wondering, because he does have the previous relationship with Frank Reich, how seamless of a transition you think that might be, and just your general thoughts on the acquisition.
Yeah, I think it's obvious to connect the dots there because Philip's very familiar with Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni, even the tight ends coach Jason Michael. There's a lot of familiarity there. Now it was mentioned recently, I think this week, that Frank picked up some things from his stop in Philadelphia since they were last together with Rivers. So I'm sure there's a couple extra wrinkles and things that Rivers didn't quite know yet, but a veteran like that, you really don't have to worry about him getting caught up to speed. So as of now, I would imagine there's a huge comfort level there without having been on the field with his teammates and stuff yet. But I would have to think that a new quarterback coming to a team, the transition doesn't get this smoother.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, since we're on the virtual off season this year, how much of an advantage do you think the previous relationship is going to be?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely huge because, again, not being able to install the offense on the field with the teammates there and everything, they're doing the best they can. And I think they feel they've got a great grasp of what they've done through Zoom, like you and I are doing here. They think they've got pretty good momentum with doing that. The only thing they think they're missing is actually being able to do things on the field right now. That we're getting to be about the time that the mandatory veteran mini camps would be starting. So they are missing that, as is every team, obviously. But the Colts are very, very comfortable with what they've been able to achieve virtually so far.
And what do you think Phillips' addition means for the future of Jacoby Brissett and the future of the quarterback position overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they've always been very, very comfortable with Jacoby as their backup. They were comfortable with him as their starter. I mean, there were some issues that came up last year with the whole offense. But, when Andrew Luck was here, they were always very, very comfortable and confident with him as their backup. So they've seen him be their starting quarterback for 2 years in 2017 and 2019. So they know what he can do. He was playing outstanding football in the first half of last season before some injuries kind of derailed things offensively. So I definitely think they like their quarterback room, especially after adding Jacob Eason. The future of the position, it's interesting because Phillip is at a point where, he's just probably going to be taking 1-year deals until his career is up. He's got that job as a high school coach in waiting once he's done. I think both he and Frank Reich would like this to be something that maybe lasts more than one season, whether it's 2 or 3, and they just kind of keep hammering out 1-year deals. So that, Phillip's future is kind of the biggest factor in all of it, because Jacoby Brissett is also entering the final year of his contract. So I think the biggest domino that we would need to see fall in order to know what the future of the Colts quarterback room is what Phillip is going to do. So if he goes out there and plays great football in 2020, then you would think that he wants to keep playing. But if he feels his skills are diminishing and he's just not enjoying things anymore, maybe he leaves after this season. So it's hard to know.
And I watched during the draft season, I watched the Colts behind the scenes on Facebook, and it looked as if both Frank Reich and the general manager, Chris Ballard, had a mandate to get tougher or more physical this offseason. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
Yeah, toughness is a huge pillar in being a player that the Colts bring in. They want smart guys, high character guys with leadership who fit in well to the locker room. They want athletic guys, but you also have to be both mentally and physically tough. They want guys who are football tough. And, Taylor and Pittman really bring that to the table. Wide receivers aren't always the toughest players you think about, but Pittman is. He's a good blocker. He wants to play special teams and not just like as a return man. He wants to be on those coverage teams and things like that. He said to us after we got the first conference call after he was drafted, he wants to put guys on his highlight tape when he's on special teams. So you don't really hear wide receivers saying that too often, especially guys who are expected to be starters. And then Taylor, I mean, God, what he did in college was awesome. He's a physical player, loves to run between the tackles, will lower his shoulder. He brings toughness, absolutely. And those are also two guys who have great mental toughness as well. So you really couldn't have found two better players who fit the Colts as well as those two do.
And when we look at the defense overall, obviously their biggest acquisition this offseason was trading for DeForest Buckner. They obviously had to give up a lot for him, but they feel that he's worth it. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that acquisition and the defense as a whole.
Yeah, it was a little surprising. Chris Ballard has never traded up. He has never traded a player for a draft pick straight up. He loves draft picks, especially a first-round draft pick. But they are absolutely ecstatic with getting someone like DeForest Buckner. They feel the most important position on their defense is that 3-tech defensive tackle, and that's what they envision for him. He's played it in San Francisco, and he's played it at an all-pro level. A lot of people consider Buckner to be a top 3 or top 5 defensive tackle in the NFL, and the Colts were able to get that for the 13th pick. So they absolutely view him as their first-round pick. They have a guaranteed high-end player, and off the field and in the locker room, he's everything they want as well. And then adding a guy like that to your front line really has a trickle-down effect throughout the defense. Better pass rush obviously improves the coverage. Quarterbacks are forced to make quicker decisions and maybe make some more errant throws. And, he's also going to command some double teams, which is going to help out his defensive line teammates. You especially look at a guy like Justin Houston, who had 11 sacks last year. It also allows the linebackers to roam a little more free and make plays. So, outside of a guy like Aaron Donald I really don't think there's any more defenders in the NFL they would have wanted more than DeForest Buckner for their defense.
And can I just ask you about the dynamics of the relationship between Frank Reich and Chris Ballard? It's been a few years now, and they seem to have a very good symbiotic relationship. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Those guys really seem to be in sync. They have very similar philosophies. Frank's an offensive-minded coach, and oftentimes you think of those guys as, their teams are finesse and, high-flying, speedy, things like that. But Frank is absolutely step in step with Chris in wanting to build the team from the inside out. You have to shore up those trenches. You want a strong offensive and defensive line. You want a tough team. And they've also been a team with an emphasis on the run. And both of those guys really, they have conviction about what they believe in, and they believe a lot of the same things. They trust each other. Frank trusts Chris to bring in the types of players that their coaches want to coach. And then, vice versa. Chris trusts Frank and their staff to get the most out of the guys that he and the front office pick up. So it's a great working relationship from everything we've seen. They've got nothing but positive things to say about each other. They're also not afraid to challenge each other. And it's not to say that everything is 100% in agreement all the time, but those guys will compromise with each other. They'll let their voices be heard. That's a big thing in that building, is they want everyone to voice their opinion, because you just can't progress as a team that way without challenging each other, without every voice being heard, because that's how you miss things, and they don't want anything to fall through the cracks. So it's definitely a huge breath of fresh air to have both of those guys in the building and working so well with each other.
And when we look at the Colts' chances overall in the division, certainly Houston made a lot of interesting decisions, to say the least, this offseason. And I don't know if Tennessee's offense is going to be as consistent or reliable. So I'm wondering if you think the Colts are primed with the positions or the acquisitions they made to contend not only for a division, but again, for a championship?
Yeah, I think the division is definitely going to be tough once again this year. Tennessee has got a great roster, especially on defense. You have to wonder how Ryan Tannehill is going to follow up the season he had last year, because he was outstanding. I mean, that offense was just really good, really dynamic. With Derrick Henry dominating the way they did, they were able to capitalize on that and have a good play-action passing game. Got huge contributions from a guy like A.J. Brown, who's now going to be going into his second year. You kind of have to wonder what it's going to look like defensively. Dean Pease, their defensive coordinator, is no longer there. So, there's talk of Mike Vrabel kind of taking over the reins defensively. So you kind of wonder how that's going to look, but they have great players on defense. So I fully expect them to still be contending at the top of the AFC South. The Texans, you kind of wonder what long-term they're going to look like, but they do look pretty decent this year. It hurts for them to no longer have DeAndre Hopkins, absolutely. But if you have Deshaun Watson, you still got a chance. That offensive line should be even a little better. With the younger pieces they've added, you would hope they get better for the Texans. Adding David Johnson, if he's not that old still.
If he can stay healthy, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If he can stay healthy, he's been one of the more better dynamic backs in the league at points in his career. So I do, if I'm being – whether or not I'm being a homer, I definitely like the Colts' chances of being at the top of the AFC South. They have no real holes on the roster. We know they've got great coaching and a great front office. They've had issues with health in the past. But if you don't have just those gutting injuries to some of your more important players, then I really like the Colts' chances in the AFC South. Because, I mean, if you look at it, just in 2018, they won a playoff game. They got to the second round and lost to the Chiefs. So they're not far removed from being a contending playoff team. They just happen to lose their Pro Bowl quarterback. Andrew Luck, most people would say, was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They abruptly lost him, and so that of course caused a little bit of hiccups. That mixed with some injuries caused them to kind of fall off a little bit last year. But they feel they've got an upgraded quarterback position this year. The offensive line is still very good. They've added some weapons offensively. That young defense was already really good and has gotten better. So there's not much to say that they shouldn't be able to pick up where they left off a couple years ago.
And my final question for you has to do with just overall in the league. Obviously, this is a different time for all of us, including professional sports. So I'm just wondering, most of the stay-at-home orders have been lifted now. So do you think we'll have football in the fall? And what do you think that might look like without fans?
Man, I sure hope so. It looks like they're – yeah, absolutely. I think they're taking some – I think we're seeing some compromises and changes being made right now that should help us see football come this fall. Whether that's going to have fans, no idea. That's still a few months away. How much has to change for us to see groups of 60, 70,000 people together? It seems questionable right now, but we just don't know. But every team's been instructed that they have to conduct training camp at their team facilities this year, no traveling. So I think things like that kind of indicate that we're maybe trending in the right direction to play football in the fall, whether it means there's fans there or not. Because, I mean, I don't know. To me, it's just a positive sign that they're still planning on playing football. They're not rushing into it with all these broad, normal plans they always have of business as usual with training camp. They have a plan in place to make sure football is played. So I'm very hopeful. Again, I think they're taking some steps to make sure football is being played, but we'll see. We're not out of the woods with this pandemic, so there's decisions to be made by people well above our pay grade, right?
Absolutely. Hey, Jake, I want to take a few minutes and thank you for joining us this afternoon on the show. It was a lot of fun, and have a great day, okay?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely.